In this webinar, you will learn how to infuse land-based learning with the science curriculum. The Winnipeg School Division's Indigenous Youth Leadership Program, in partnership with the Centre for Indigenous Environmental Resources and Windun, Inc., provided an opportunity for students to get out on the land with a traditional knowledge keeper and elder. Students engaged in learning about traditional medicines and the Western science perspectives for native plant life. Participants will learn examples of how to implement land-based education into science curriculum, connections between Indigenous traditional medicines and the scientific importance of wetlands, and the importance of sustainable development. Our presenters this evening are Lindsay Trudeau. She has been a teacher in the Winnipeg School Division since 2006. She is currently one of 4 Aboriginal graduation coaches in the division and continuously works to offer meaningful connections to Indigenous cultures for students. Lindsay is Métis from the traditional homelands of the Métis Nation, Winnipeg, Manitoba. And Rena Bright. She has worked in the Winnipeg School Division since 2007. She is currently in the role of Indigenous Education Consultant and Support Teacher. Originally from Sandy Bay First Nation, she uses both her traditional and professional knowledge to provide support and resources to all staff in the Winnipeg School Division to infuse Indigenous perspectives throughout. The purpose of these webinars is to share lessons, strategies, and successful practices to increase the success of Indigenous students K-12. Thank you for taking the time to view this webinar. We appreciate your interest and we welcome any feedback or suggestions. I'd also like to thank our funders, Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada. I'm going to now ask Lindsay and Rena to begin.
Rena Bright, Indigenous Education Consultant for the Winnipeg School Division.
And I'm Lindsay Trudeau, Aboriginal grad coach in the Winnipeg School Division.
So we're going to be talking to you about infusing land-based education with the science curriculum. This is an activity that we provided as part of our Indigenous Youth Leadership Program. So I'm going to talk a little bit first about our Indigenous Youth Leadership Program, and then we'll take you into the details of one of the activities that we offered as part of our Indigenous Youth Leadership Program in infusing land-based education with science. So our Indigenous Youth Leadership Program was developed to support the learning and growth of Indigenous students in the Winnipeg School Division. Our population is just under 1/4 of our entire student population is declared Indigenous. So we decided that we were going to develop this program to create a sense of belonging, embrace cultural identity, foster relationships, and build capacity to really address the needs of our Indigenous student population within the Winnipeg School Division. Our Indigenous Youth Leadership Program, also called IYLP for short, is targeted at grades 9 to 12 students right across our school division. We have our 4 graduation coaches as well as an Indigenous education consultant who runs the program, mostly due to our graduation coaches, which have the direct contact with students in 4 of the high schools, but they're also closely linked with all other schools within the school division, which have grades 9 to 12. And they have close contact with teachers in all of the high schools to kind of recruit and keep track of all of these students that we have in this program. Right now, we are currently at upwards of 200 students. So a bit of an overview of the program. It's designed to foster the learning and growth of Indigenous students in the division with a focus on Indigenous culture and leadership. We take a holistic approach by providing gatherings throughout the year that focus on the students' physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional well-being. And we provide experiences in land-based learning, career planning, post-secondary school exposure, leadership skills, peer relationship building, and social justice issues. So we really try to take a well-rounded approach at the activities and experiences that we offer the students that are participants in our Indigenous Youth Leadership Program. We have 5 learning experiences that are organized throughout the year for all 200 students, and we have an opportunity to earn high school credits. So we kind of went into detail in another webinar in terms of the ins and outs of credit achievement for the IYLP program, and today we'll talk about one of the activities. So what we did was one of our activities took place at Broken Head Wetland Interpretive Trail. At this specific location, students learned all sorts of connections between Indigenous knowledge and tied that to our kind of Western colonial curricular outcomes of the science curriculum. So if we were to specifically go into grade 10, senior 2, our cluster 1 curriculum. This is a curriculum based out of the province of Manitoba. So we've got a unit on the dynamics of ecosystems. At a location such as this where we're learning off of the land, we like to emphasize kind of that there was an education system in place previous to our very westernized curriculum outcome framework that we teach now in our school system, and kind of go back to, you know, what did learning off the land look like and how valuable this was to our people and how valuable it still is even today. And we make those connections to, you know, kind of pre-colonial education to our education system today, and specifically the grade 10 learning outcomes for science. So the outcomes that were covered during this experience, the students explore how carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen are cycled through an ecosystem. They discuss factors that may disturb biogeochemical cycles. Identify plants and trees by their scientific name. Identify the importance of ecosystems like swamps, bogs, and fens. Observe and document a range of organisms that illustrate the biodiversity within a local or regional ecosystem. And explain how the biodiversity of an ecosystem contributes to its sustainability. So these are all outcomes that are kind of very scientific in nature. However, we also like to make the connection between, you know, these are things that our people also learned without them being, you know, kind of put in bullet form and numbered off, and with these specific names to them. So we like to create that connection of, you know, we did value our education system for a purpose then, and, you know, we can still make those very crucial, important connections today with our curriculum.
Mm-hmm. So what this day also entailed was groups going off and looking at the specific science outcomes and that Western science approach, and then and split up to the other group of students, then went through the interpretive trail with an elder and knowledge keeper to look at that traditional knowledge. Also noticed throughout this trail there are the 7 traditional Ojibwe teachings. And so here you can see an example of what you will see on this trail with the traditional Ojibwe word and for respect, and a bit of an explanation for it. So the traditional knowledge that students received while on this trip, students were able to recognize the 7 Ojibwe teachings, which were kind of highlighted throughout the trail. They will view the Ojibwe terms for specific plants and trees. They will learn their uses for a traditional cultural aspect. They again the traditional uses of plants, how to collect these medicines in a sustainable way, and that's a very important teaching, especially with our Indigenous cultures, is that you only take what you need, and the way you harvest it is so that you leave some for others and for it to replenish. Always being very respectful of the plants that you were using. Also, learning the importance of preserving this traditional Indigenous knowledge, because we don't want it to be lost, and that we need to keep teaching our Indigenous youth this so that it does continue to flourish. So here you can see an example of the Ojibwe term for this plant, as well as the scientific term for the plant, which is found along the trail. And then again, students were able to look closely at various plants, and you can see there's descriptions that were given for the scientific as well as the traditional uses, what they were used for, and where they can be found, how they can be harvested. And so assessment of what students are learning on this activity is the students were able to use their devices. So again, we're infusing some of that technology into this as well. high school students tend to have their cell phones with them or some kind of device. So we encouraged and we adapted so that the students were using them in an appropriate way. And so they were able to capture photos of various plant life, and then they were to submit them to a teacher with a short write-up, which included the scientific name of the plant, the traditional Ojibwe name, its medicinal purpose, and then how the Western scientific purpose of that plant in that ecosystem. So here's some examples of students taking pictures along the trail and a student submitted plant, and then just some quotes of what students learned for the day. So students learned that there is a male and a female of everything. Everything is connected in one way or another. That wetlands are important for habitats and for holding down water. Students learn that water passes through this wetland and is purified and cleaner after it has gone through, and that Aboriginal people in the past made rock formations and hid special resources there for the next generation. So there's that sustainability as well. And that knowledge that is still kind of apparent for generation to generation.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions so we can get some more information about this particular lesson and how students are engaging with, I guess, land-based learning and the science curriculum. So can you tell me more about the impact that this is having on your students' learning?
We were both gonna jump in to answer that. Yeah, I was gonna kind of mention here that not only is this piece just about engaging students in land-based learning and curricular outcomes, but it's proven to be so much more than that. Like, yeah, this is just one of those experiences that we offer throughout the year. But now students are not only building a connection and a hook and an engagement into school into, oh, this was what my science teacher was talking about, but it's become so much more than that in the sense of now they're also getting that cultural piece and building a sense of their identity. It's like, oh, I've seen this plant in perhaps like my cuckoo's house, or perhaps I've seen this or I've heard about this, and it's that engagement piece where they want to know so much more about it.
And validating.
Exactly.
Also, right, that traditional information that's been around for so many years, but not necessarily in the school. And so now to see it both infused, that traditional knowledge is validating for what they've kind of had from their elders.
But it's also the power in numbers too. Like when we get 200 Indigenous youth together on a learning activity such as this, like to see how much, it's different when you take 30 students, it's different when you take 90 students, but when you have 200 Indigenous youth all engaged in this at the same time, they look forward to seeing each other at the next event. And so not only is it a purpose to attend our events, but now it's also let's use this as a hook to engage them in school. And ultimately we've shown from our data that they're earning credits from this, that they're more engaged in school, attendance is going up, and our graduation rates are going up.
And how about the other educators that are involved?
Do you want to speak to the other educators involved?
Well, we had partnered with CEAR, so that Center for Indigenous Education Resources.
Yeah.
And so they kind of provided, because they work with these wetlands in Broken Head and they run different projects, so we kind of came together to bring our students out in a meaningful way, and that they had provided the traditional knowledge keeper for us who was familiar with the lands, who kind of grew up, his family history was there. It's important that, we didn't just bring anybody else, and just anybody out with us, that it was somebody who carries that knowledge and those teachings specific to the land that we were visiting. And then some of the teachers that came with us from the other high schools just were blown away by the engagement of the students. Sometimes you have students that aren't very engaged, sitting in a traditional desk inside of a concrete building. But then here we are, we're learning science, we're doing kind of what can be done in the classroom, but we're doing it on the land. And the students are they're really engaged, they're really appreciative of being out in the natural environment.
It must be quite the experience for those teachers who aren't really utilizing this strategy in their own classrooms to join you, right, out on the land and to be learning about Indigenous science. I think often it's something that maybe isn't as acknowledged as commonly as it should be. Like, of course we were scientists. We are scientists, right? I mean, that's how we survived in the various geographies and climates of this land, is we are scientists and we are mathematicians and we are innovators. So I just thought I'd ask, more about what it's like for those educators, and do you see them going back to their respective classrooms and trying to find ways to build those connections themselves?
I think there's definitely a lot more buzz.
Yes.
Now that we've grown so big so fast, and like the 4 grad coaches, they work so hard in their 4 home schools, but they've also developed these relationships with teachers in their contact schools. So what I see, kind of, as I'm not the immediate grad coach, but what I see from attending these events is, the same contact teachers coming and getting excited about the events, and I know that they're taking that excitement back to their school, where they're almost like a mini grad coach, so to speak, in terms of, talking about, oh, this is what we did over here, and maybe we can infuse some of this into our school.
And to give an example, so we brought our IYLP program out for this, but also I'm working with another teacher from another school who runs a bit of a medical program. We also planned the same activities for her to bring her medical students out and do the same trip that we did, and infusing that science and with that traditional medicinal knowledge. So it is happening, and it is kind of spreading to other educators.
And I think a lot of the activities that are run, they do kind of take off, and we see little pockets of the same activities happening throughout the division, which
definitely.
is great.
Yeah, and this place, like, it sounds like an amazing resource to have in the community, right? To be able to go to a specific location and to have the language and the teachings incorporated already for you on site. And I think that it's probably not common across the country to have that kind of place. Although, I know in some areas there are different centers and different locations where educators can engage in learning on the land and taking their students on field trips. But for those educators that may not have those opportunities, I think we want to encourage them to think of ways that they can still, connect with their local geography. It doesn't necessarily have to be a place like this, but, they can take ideas that have been shared here and in the lesson plan that we're going to accompany the recording with, and figure out, how does this fit in my particular community, and where can we go and explore some of these ideas and concepts, and doing maybe the research to expand on those ideas, because there are a lot of amazing resources out there. I think today I actually saw through social media an article in today's Parent, of all things, on the 7 grandfather teachings.
Wow.
And it was a local Indigenous artist, I think it's Chief Ladybird, maybe, who provided the illustrations for it. And I was like, today's Parent. That's interesting. So I'm going to have to check it out a little bit further myself and really see, like, what is it that they're sharing and who's been contributing to this. But I would encourage educators to, think about ways that they can connect with the land and how they can connect with their local Indigenous knowledge, but also Indigenous resources, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. There are lots of people within the community. It's a matter of building those relationships and nurturing those relationships.
Yeah. And I think that this lesson, too, is a good example of how to build that community and start to build those relationships with different resources and agencies, because we actually didn't know that this trail was there. we didn't know about this wetland initially. And it wasn't until we started building these relationships with different organizations, different Indigenous organizations in resources, that we were able to come up and build a program together like this. So I do think with a little bit of research and exploring, these sorts of things may be there. You just may not be aware that they're there. And so it's really important in building that community outside of just that school as well.
Yeah, and if those resources aren't there, then hey, maybe that can become, an inquiry project for the class, right? Let's go build something like this. Let's do something locally. So I'm going to thank you for sharing this particular lesson and this adventure that you've had with the Indigenous Youth Leadership Program and other students within the schools. And we've got contact information for anybody who's watching the recording. If you'd like, you can reach out to Rena Bright, who is the Indigenous Education Consultant and one of our hosts this evening. Also, Lindsay Trudeau, the Aboriginal Graduation Coach. And of course, you've got Rob Riel, Director of Indigenous Education and Newcomer Services, who is also available to provide some feedback. So yeah, thank you, and that's a wrap.